You guys hear me?
Yeah.
Howdy, howdy.
Question. Is the Zoom link that's in the top of the channel the same one that's on the calendar?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
All right, it's 5:30. Like I said, we start on time. So I'm actually in Tulsa. I'm at the place where we'll be meeting for the Tulsa folks. So I just wanted to make sure that we were good to go. I'll actually, we'll be here Saturday in Tulsa to kind of see the Tulsa crew. So yeah, this is where you'll be if you're in Tulsa on Saturday. All right, how was the homework?
That's good.
Sweet. All right, well, let's hop in. So, we want to just get a quick, sorry, I need to turn off the let people in setting. Just auto let people in. Okay, so we want to kind of get a foundation with CSS. And does anybody know what CSS stands for?
Cascading
style sheet.
Correct. Kind of, so that term cascading is about like how, if you have like multiple things trying to dictate how something should be styled, that it has like rules for what is ultimately going to be the chosen style for something. Yes, happy hump day. So that's where the cascading comes from. So we're not going to talk too much about that because when we get to React, that's sort of the first place that we're going to start building larger applications that have like lots of different pages and lots of different components and things like that. In the way that we style things in the React world, kind of gets rid of the need to write massive CSS files and things like that. It just kind of changes the game. So we're really gonna just focus on understanding the different types of properties that you can set and control with CSS, and worry less about the different ways that you can select things and apply styling. We'll have to learn like the basics of it to be able to do things before we get to React. But we're not gonna be making like huge websites or anything like that early on, so. Okay. So, the first thing we wanna do is kinda get set up in our work environment. So who remembers what we need to do to start coding? Like what's, let's imagine we don't have VS Code open, we don't have anything open for coding. What's like the first thing that we would do to get rolling? So I'm gonna go ahead and close VS Code.
Open it and then you can do it through Visual Studio Code where you can go to your file location and do your day 3 if that's how you set it up.
Yes, so we will open VS Code. And then we need to find where we want to go. So all of you should have made some sort of location where you want to store your code. So you're going to want to go to there, like you mentioned. So we'll do file open folder. For me, I'm going to go to code, OK Coders, curriculum, module 1, day 3. But for you, you would go to wherever you're trying to store everything currently, which can, for now, like just putting everything in the same spot is probably okay, or splitting things up by day is probably good too, whatever your preference is. So go ahead and open that folder. I actually want to go up one, so I'm going to close this and redo it. Okay. And then we want to what was the next step in the instructions, whoever was offering them to me?
You would do a new file for like day 3 or whatever, but it would be day3.html.
Good. So I'll just name this in-class.html. Okay. Let's just get some basic HTML stuff in here. Oh, I gotta turn off Copilot. Okay, let's just talk about that real quick. So maybe some of you haven't seen Copilot yet. So Copilot was the thing that when I started typing, it like guessed what I wanted. So you can see here, it's like, oh, you probably, and let's just go ahead and accept what it's saying. So it's like, you probably want a head and a title, and you probably want a body. And it just like guessed that. And if you have Copilot on, whenever you're programming, it'll just do that all the time. Yeah, it's crazy. It'll just like guess whatever you're trying to do. And it's pretty good at it. So it's like super handy, I use it all the time, but we wanna really make sure we get like a foundation in the fundamentals before you start relying on that. So anyways, I'm gonna turn that off real quick. Okay. All right, so I've got the start of a web page, and now what's the next thing we do to get going, to start programming? So if I want to see this page in my browser, what do I need to do?
Start live server.
Good, so you go down to the bottom right, you hit go live, and then that'll open up in your, whatever your web browser is. this to okay, coders. Okay, so now we're rolling. So that's the setup that you need to remember and get used to start coding. You know, figure out where your code is. Maybe you're picking up from code you left off on, so you need to go find that folder, or you're starting new code, so you make a new folder, but then open it in VS Code, make whatever file you need, and then start live server. So hopefully you've got that down now. Okay, so we learned HTML, and that just allowed us to do some basic stuff. Everything we did was just like black and white, right? So everything we made was just text typically, or maybe there was a picture, or maybe there was like some form inputs that we could do, right? But everything's very bland. The Copilot was, so there's actually a Copilot that GitHub provides. So it's called GitHub Copilot, which you can get it for free if you're a student. So it is a Microsoft product, yeah. So all of our pages have been very bland so far, right? So if we want to change the way things look, or if we want to change maybe their position on the page relative to other things, we want to change colors or fonts, or we want to just make things look differently, all of that is in the realm of CSS. So if we want to start doing things with CSS, what's like one way that we can get started? Like if I wanted to make this text here red, for example, what's one way that I could do that?
Change
could
the body
assign-
color.
Yeah, I heard two people.
Yeah, I was gonna say assign the color in the HTML tag.
Okay, so you said assign the color in the HTML tag, is that what you said?
Yep.
And so is that, can you walk me through that? Is that in this file or?
Well, first you would have to create a reference for that title attribute.
Okay, and then, so I want to change like this paragraph, for example. So you're saying make a reference for this paragraph. What do you mean by make a reference?
You can add like a dot, whatever you want to call it, paragraph color, and then reference that in your CSS file.
Okay, cool. So that's one way we can do it. We can, and that is like, we'll make a separate CSS file. And then we would need to link the CSS file. And then I think what you were describing is basically do what's called a class selector. So we're gonna make up a class name. We're gonna then apply that property to the class and then link the class to whatever elements on the page we want to have that style, right? So that's like typically if you're writing CSS straight up and you're not using something like React, that's typically the preferred way to do it. There's a few other ways that we can do it though. So does anybody know, besides linking a CSS file, the other ways that we can apply a style to HTML? There's two other ways.
Inline style.
And then, yeah, inline style looks like, well, sorry, when you say inline style, can you walk me through what you're thinking?
Oh, just like H1 style equals, and then the parentheses color red or whatever. Just
Yeah. So we can do style equals. What is style equals? What is that? Like in terms of like, we talked about, hey, here's an element, a p tag, there's an opening and the closing, and then what is the style piece of it?
Style's an attribute.
Attribute, very good. So yeah, style's an attribute, and then attributes are typically just strings, right? So I think Elizabeth, you mentioned we would just do color and then red. In VS Code, I assume you guys are getting this too. It'll kind of do this cool color thing for you, which is really cool. But yeah, there we go. So we save it, and if we go back to our webpage, it's red now. So that's inline style, and then what's the other way that we can do it? So the other way that we could do it would include a class name potentially. So let's say class paragraph style. So if I don't want to make a CSS file, but I want to use and I want to make styling for this class, what do I do? Yeah, so the other way is a style tag, and where do we put the style tag typically?
The head.
Yeah, so you can put that up in the head, and so we would just do style. And then now we like switch from HTML syntax to CSS syntax, so we can now write CSS. And if I want to, instead of doing the inline style for color red, if I want to do that color red with the class, what do I type? So how do I make a
Type
go
dot.
ahead.
You type the dot character and then paragraph style. Open curly braces. And then apply your attributes. So it'd be
Okay.
color. Yep.
And then there's one thing I'm missing that you typically need at the end here. Does anybody know what character I need at the end?
The semicolon.
Yeah. So I'm gonna get rid of, well, actually, this is fun. This is a good chance for us to see what's happening here. So I've got the paragraph style class. I've applied that class to this paragraph, and then I also have this inline style. So when we go to the web page, it's going to be red, right? But if I, for example, change this to blue here, what color will the page be?
It'll still be red.
Good. So let's verify that. Yep, so it's still red. And why is it still red?
I don't know this for a fact, but I assume that because the inline style has authority over the style that's in the header.
Correct. So that's our first sort of look at the cascading piece. There's a order of what's called specificity. So if having an inline style is like the most specific you could be. Like it's like obviously for that p tag, it's like the closest you can get to the element. Whereas like a class name that's made in the style tag is a little bit less specific. And then like a class name that's in like a CSS style sheet is even less specific. Now there is a way where you can mess with the specificity of things in sort of like a no-no way. It's often discouraged. Does anybody know how I could potentially make it blue, even though there's the more specific style tag that says red?
Important.
Yeah, so there's this attribute called important, and it makes it more specific. And that's just you're sort of just like breaking the rules a little bit. So you don't want to do this a lot, but you will see that sometimes where someone's like, hey, like I can't get this thing to be the color I want, so I'm just gonna slap important on there, and that'll typically override something that's more specific. Okay.
Can you explain why that's discouraged?
Because like our code gets large, and lots of people work on it. So as we build software, like for a while during this boot camp, most of the time you're going to be writing software by yourself, and it's all code that you've written. But what happens is when you join a team and software gets bigger, lots of people work on it, and lots of people end up sharing basically the same code base. So like there's like, you know, if a company has 5 employees, for example, that are all software engineers, they're typically all working on the same code, the same project, right? The same web app or whatever it is that you're selling. And so, you know, someone might have like written a style somewhere that is more specific. So for example, maybe they have an ID. So an ID, which is another way that we can target something, is more specific than a class, right? So like they wrote code that was very specific to an element because it has an ID, but then you come in and for some reason you decide to put styling in a class and use important when they already had a styling within that ID. If you're coming in and you're like, why is this element now this color? It might take you a second to like figure out like the ID should be the thing that's dictating the color here, but it's not working. So now I got to go find this class that's overriding the typical way that it works. And so it can just be potentially confusing. And it's just, you're just sort of breaking a pattern that you should typically expect to work.
Gotcha. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Cool. Okay, so if we want to have styling in a different, like if we don't want to do this inline style or the style tag, we would make a CSS file. So we can put the CSS file wherever we want. We can just make a new file that's called inclass.css. So notice we're using a different file extension, .css instead of .html. We can also put our CSS in like a different folder. You'll see that sometimes where someone would make a CSS folder and then put all the CSS files in there. We're not going to be making that many files yet, so it's okay to just put it here. The important thing is just that you link it correctly. So how do I link this in-class CSS to this in-class HTML file?
So you would take the inside inside style, you put a link element, and then you put the attribute REL for relationship, and then you put the just put the file name in there. I think something like that.
Yeah, it is something like that. So there's a link, and then it's like, I'm surprised this isn't telling me. Oh, I'm still in the style tag, that's why. So link, relation is what, style? And then we would do, what is it?
Yeah, it's href.
Href. And then we would do / or just in class.css.
Ta-da.
Okay, and so now we can, and by the way, if you're using VS Code and you want to have 2 pages open side by side, you can, so notice I have the HTML file and then the CSS file here, both open. I can drag and have them be side by side like this, which is a pretty common practice to kind of have two open at the same time. Can you guys see this okay, by the way? Is it zoomed in enough?
It's fine, yeah.
Okay, I'll go up one. All right, so if we want to have a new class here, we can define it with the same syntax that we use if we were using the style tag. So we can do more paragraph style. And this would need, I want to do a class, so it would look like that with the dot. And then how else should I style this paragraph? What's another attribute that might make sense besides just color?
Font.
Sorry, what?
Font.
Font, okay. Like you want to change the font to, man, fonts is a complicated one. You chose one that has a lot of options here. So what do you want me to, do you know like what I could do with this attribute or what I could set it to?
And you could change the font style, size, italicize it or bold it.
Okay, we can do font size. Why is my option going away? There we go. So you can see VS Code is typically good about giving us like hints and stuff of what the options are. So we can do font size larger, for example. And then, okay, so I've made this CSS file, I've linked it. So if I go to my webpage at this point, should my paragraph have a larger font size?
No, not yet.
And why not yet?
Because you don't have the correct class name.
Good. So I want to keep this class name here. Like I want this color blue, this important blue. So if I want two classes applied to my paragraph, what do I need to do?
Do a comma after the first one and then add the second.
So we do use a comma in our CSS in certain cases, but when applying the class, we actually just put a space. So we just do more paragraph style. Okay, and then if we are not seeing what we expect, or if there's some sort of issue, or we want to see what's going on our webpage, what can we open to kind of look at what's happening?
Developer mode.
Yeah, so we'll open our dev tools. So does anybody remember the shortcut? The keyboard shortcut?
Function 12.
What?
F12.
Okay.
Or right click and inspect.
Yep. F12 I think works. Inspect works. There's also I think Command Option I or Command Option J. Or man, what is it? I'm trying to remember.
On a window, I think it's Control Shift I.
Oh wait, what is it?
On a Mac, on a Mac, it's Option Command I.
Oh my gosh, what did I just do? Go away. Okay. Command Option I. I thought I pushed that, but it's, yeah. So Command Option I will open it, or we can do those other things that were mentioned. Okay, and so now we can look at what's happening. So we see, you know, here's our different elements. The main one we've been messing with is the P tag, and so we'll click on that. We can see, we can see that our style is on there, our classes are on there. And then we can look at over here, here's everything that's happening. And it'll typically tell you where it's coming from. You can see that this element style has color red. Element style here meaning there is a style tag on that element, which is the most specific way it can be. And you can see it's crossed out. It's crossed out because it's not being applied because we have this blue color that's important, which is coming from the class paragraph style. Actually, don't see more paragraph style. Is it comma? Or did our style sheet not get linked?
I think it's rel equals style sheet instead of rel style. And then
Okay, yeah. So notice that I don't see our more paragraph style coming in, right? So that class isn't showing up. So yeah, now we have to debug, and it looks like somebody already figured it out. So this link here seems to be not correct. Now, normally I'd expect the console to be telling me that, but I'm not seeing that. So the rel should be style sheet, you said. And yeah, there we go, it showed up. So now you can see our more paragraph style is showing up from our in-class.css. So remember, everything, you have to type everything perfectly or it'll break. Okay, and then I often, if I'm trying to mess around, I often will just do it in here, as I mentioned before. So if I want a different color, I'll maybe click on this and then pick the color and just kind of see how it looks on the page before I've committed my code. So, you know, I can change that color, I can change the font size to something different. And then it's like, okay, yeah, I like this. And so I would then need to go apply it in my code. But I can like more quickly iterate on how it looks within the browser and then go back and fix it. And if I refresh now, those changes will go away. So if I refresh, we're back to blue and font size larger. So, you know, changing stuff in the browser like that doesn't persist it. Okay, so when I change the font size from just larger, which is just this built-in browser setting that it will pick what larger means. If I want to be more specific about the font size that I want, I typed in one of the options a second ago. So does anybody know what I typed in to change the font size?
Pixels or EMs?
Good. So a common thing you'll see is pixels. So a pixel is like literally like a pixel, like on the computer screen, like the size of a pixel. And so you'll see that used quite a bit. So 16 pixels is what I just applied here. And so that's this size. And you'll just start intuitively understanding how big that is. And we use like 16 pixels, 10 pixels, 5 pixels, 25 pixels, 100 pixels. You're going to use that size for all types of things. So it's not just the size of a font. We also will use pixels with what other types of properties, or what other properties use pixels that you guys have seen so far.
padding and margin.
Padding, margin, great examples. What else? So we haven't really specified Like when we were dealing with images, for example, we started messing with what properties for that.
Height.
and width.
Height, width, yeah. So you'll use pixels for, you know, how big something should be, how far away something should be from other things, how indented things should be, where things should be on the page. I mean, use it all the time. And so you'll just start getting an intuitive feel for how big 10 pixels is, or 5 pixels is, or 16 pixels is. Does anybody know what the typical default font size is on a web page?
12? No?
Yeah, I want to say 12 also.
I'm actually not even sure. I think it's 16, but maybe it's 12.
I was gonna say 16. Yeah.
Yeah, I think 16.
Okay.
Google says 16.
Okay, cool. So that's just the default font size, right? 12 feels right though, I totally agree. But yeah, 16 is sort of just the default font size that a browser will pick for you. Now besides pixels, what are some of the other things we can use? Well, one was already mentioned. So what was the other one that was mentioned for sizing? EM, yeah. And then what's the other one that's pretty similar to EM? Yeah, REM. Does anybody know what that stands for? So REM stands for root element. And so it means relative, like basically you're saying I want my size relative to the font size of the root element. So the root element is what? The very bottom base of the tree, right, that we talked about the other day. We've got the HTML is this big tree that grows. What's the base?
HTML.
Yeah, HTML is the root element, it's the first element on the page. And so the default font size is 16. So when you say 1 rem, what size is that?
16.
16, exactly. And then 2 rem would be 32 pixels, right? So you'll see typically either pixels or em or rem, and I think typically preference is to use. Well, actually, does anybody know what em is? So it's a size relative to what? Not the root element, but so em is relative to just the parent element. So the element that's above, or like wrapping or containing the element that you're applying to. So it's typically more useful to, you're typically going to be using rem from what I've seen, but so typically pixel or rem is most popular, and rem is typically preferred because it makes it a lot easier to make web pages dynamic and make them change based off the screen size and like what device is being used. So when you're writing a web page, it could be like this, you know, it could be like that, it could be like this, like it could be any size. Like you have no idea what type of screen someone's going to be using. You know, when you're developing a native app, it's like, well, for iOS, you know, it's like there's only so many sizes that you have to worry about because it's an iPhone, and you know, there's a smaller one and a big one, and that's about it. But when you're dealing with a web page, it could be on a phone, it could be on a desktop, it could be on a tablet, it could be on a huge monitor, right? So you have to think about making your web page look good at all those different sizes. And one of the tools that can aid in that endeavor is using that relative sizing. Because basically what you can do is you can say, okay, hey, if they're on a smaller screen, then set the default font size for the HTML tag to 12 pixels instead of 16. Because you typically want your fonts to be smaller, when you're on a smaller device, you're looking at your phone right in front of you, basically. Okay. There's another pretty helpful size thing that's related to what I just talked about, like the size of the current screen. Does anybody know what property that is? I'll give a hint. The word viewport or view is in it. Yes, so there's VW and there's VH. And we can say, hey, make this 100 VW. Or actually, am I remembering that right?
And what are those elements? VW and VH, what do those stand for?
So VW is viewport width and VH is viewport height. So if you want to know, like, hey, how wide is this page or how tall? Well, you're not asking how, but you just are saying, hey, I want to make this element either the full viewport width or like some percentage of it. And so, for example, if we want to add an image to this page, so let's do that. So in my body here, I'm going to add an image. Does anybody remember the two most common attributes I might put on here?
Source.
Yeah, source. And then what's the other one?
Alt.
Alt's good. So we're gonna go back to Carl here. And I have it from day 2. Carl is in there, so I'll link to that. So I'm gonna go up a directory /day2/Carl. So you don't need to worry about learning these URLs quite yet. But this is saying, hey, I want to pull in an image. And I can either pull in an image from the internet by doing like a full URL, like https:// wherever the image is, or since I'm developing locally, I can reference something on my computer. And so my current location is in day 3 in class HTML, but I want to pull in this Carl image, which is up a directory and then in the day 2 folder, and then inside that folder. And so that's what this syntax is saying. ... means up one, and then I want to go to the day 2 folder and then pull in Carl. So if we just add Carl and look at the page, he's huge. We didn't specify a width or height, but we can specify a specific width. So we can add. So now if I want to style only this image, I only want to write styles for this specific Carl image, should I use a class to do that, or is there some other better way for me to target this image given what I just said?
You can just write width in there and then
Yes, I could do that, but I want to do more than just that. I actually want to write additional CSS properties potentially. So what's the other way for me to select an element that's very specific, that's not inline style?
The ID tag?
Yes, the ID tag. So I can add an ID here, and I can say ID equals Carl, okay? And then in my CSS, I can target an ID rather than a class. So what's the syntax for that?
The hashtag or # Carl.
Yep, Carl. And then we can also specify width here. So you can specify width directly on the image, and then you can also specify it in the CSS. Okay, so we can do, width is 1 rem, for example. So that's 16 pixels there, pretty small. Or if we want it to be half of the width of the whole page, we can do 50 viewport width. And notice it's taking up only half of the screen now. And if I change the size of the screen, it adjusted. So no matter what screen someone's looking at this on, it'll be half of the width of the screen. Okay. One second, let me look at some of the stuff I wanted to cover here. Okay. So let's add an input. What are some of the different types of inputs that are available to me? For the type attribute. So what's one of the, sorry, say that again?
Button.
Button, but if I want to be able to like type stuff.
Text.
Text. I think
Label.
someone,
Form.
what was that?
Forum.
Form? Well, form is a specific tag type.
Oh yeah, my bad.
You're good. There are no mistakes here. So one of the ones, so we mentioned there's like password was one of them. There's actually an email type as well, because we made like an email password one and I kept email as text, but there's actually a specific type of email. So we can add our input. If we want it to have a label, we kind of learned that we can add this label tag, but then we need to put the input in there, and then we can put, you know, email like that. And then if we want it to be not inline or whatever, we can then also wrap it in a div. Okay, so we got our email here. I don't like how close Carl is to this input. So what can I do to push the input away so that's not so close to Carl?
Margin.
Margin, yeah. So we can use margin for that. And I can apply that margin. Let's look at kind of the page setup here. So I've got my div, I've got my label, and I've got my input. So like I can apply the margin to the label, or I could apply it to the div if I wanted to. If I did it to the div, it's going to push anything next to the div away from it. So it would push the image, it would push itself away from the image. If I did it to the label would push itself away from the div. So if I want to, so I'm going to put margin on the div. If I just did, well, let's actually do it here. So let's add an ID here of email, and then attach to that, and then do margin, and then do 10 pixels. And notice nothing happened, and if I click on that div, I don't see that ID attached to it yet. So we need to figure out what's going on there. So, alright, if you look at my screen now, why isn't that applying? So for some reason my ID didn't get that margin attached to it, so what's wrong?
Your ID in the wrong place.
So I'll give you a hint. The code's correct. So whenever I make a change, it doesn't show up in the browser until after I do what?
Save the file.
Save the file. So my HTML file is not saved. And this is a bug that you all will do probably 50 times throughout this course. So just know about that one. Like if you don't see what you expect on the webpage, make sure your files are saved. So let me save it and go back. And then now we see that it's moved away a little bit, right? And I did margin by itself. So I just said margin 10 pixels. So that setting does what to the div? So it didn't just move it 10 pixels away from Carl. Carl's above it. So like when I did margin 10 pixels, where is all the margin happening?
Everywhere? Like on
Yeah.
four sides of it?
Yeah.
Because it doesn't specify which margin is.
Yeah, exactly. So when we do margin, if we don't specify anything else, it's margin on the top, the bottom, the right, and the left. And so if we actually, that's what's really nice about using these dev tools. It really helps you get a more visual and intuitive sense of what's going on here. If we hover over the div, you'll notice that it's showing us the margin for us. So the blue part is the actual element, like the actual like content of it. And then the orange part is the margin. And so you can see there's 10 pixels on the top, bottom, right, and left. So there's 10 pixels from here to there, 10 pixels from here to there, 10 pixels from here to there. And then this is a block level element, so it spans the whole page, but then there's 10 pixels from here to there. So you see that there. Okay, but if we only want the margin to be on the top, does anybody know what we can do?
Margin top.
Margin top, yeah. So we can change this element to say margin top like that. And now it's only applying it to the top, and we can see that visually reflected here as well. Now the orange is only on the top.
Okay, and then by that same logic, is there another attribute for that, for margin bottom, margin left, margin right, etc.?
Yes. Exactly.
Okay,
But you can you can do it all in line, in one line, like margin, and then it will be top, right, bottom, left.
Yeah. So this one's kind of fancy, and I don't find myself doing it a lot, but we can say 10 pixels, 5 pixels, 4 pixels, 3 pixels. Oh wait, what did I do wrong? Oh wait, it can't be margin top here on this attribute. Okay, so you can say margin, and then like is it Ariana or what's her?
Oh, Irina.
Irina?
Yes.
Like Irina said, top, right, bottom, left is how it's, let me be a little more dramatic here. So top.
If I remember it correctly.
Yeah, I actually can't even remember. So we'll do.
Yeah, it's just like a clock. Top, right, bottom left. Yep.
50, 25, 5. So yeah, if we hover over this now, we've got the top is 100 pixels. Actually, if you scroll all the way down on here, you'll see the whole thing called box model, which we'll learn more about later. Here's the whole box model for the element. And you can see 100 on the top, 50 on the right, 25 on the bottom, and 5 on the left. So yeah, it follows a clock. So you can, if you need to specify for some reason different margins for top, right, bottom, and left, then there you go. You've got that way to do it. Typically, you're using the same margin, or you're just doing margin top or margin bottom. Or you're just doing margin, like you're not, I don't find myself needing different margins on every single side. But there you go. Okay, so you'll typically, when we're writing CSS, you're typically going to be doing it in a CSS file. So you'll make a separate CSS file, you'll link it, and then you're typically going to be writing classes and then ID selectors. The reason we want to do classes is if we're making a page that, for example, maybe we have like a list. So like, let's say, I'll keep using Pitchfork as a good example. So let's say we're trying to make this website, and like this website here. Notice that we have a list of stuff. We've got a bunch of the same thing. It's like a repetition of the same thing. We'll call these like cards, or I typically call it like cards or boxes or something like that. And so we want basically the same styling across all of these, with just a different image, a different title, and then potentially some special styling if it's like really good. So notice, like, if it's a really good album, they'll do this like best new reissue and then have this little thing at the top right. If it's best, yeah, so like, but anyways, it's all sort of the same. So typically what you would do is you'd write a class that's like these are all reviews. So maybe you'd call the class like review or something like that. And you would make the styling for it so that you could reuse it across all these different things here. So that's classes, so that you can write something once and then apply it to a bunch of elements. And then ID is if it's very specific, like styling for a very specific thing, which, like, for example, there's only one nav bar and there's only one logo. And so the logo is probably an ID that has the styling for the logo, because you don't need that on any other element on the page. It's the only logo on the page that's in the nav bar. So that's what you'll need to know. And then just as you get, you just need to get used to knowing all the different attributes that are out there that are important. I asked ChatGPT, hey, just like, what are some of the most common attributes in CSS? And you can have it walk you through all those. And then you can ask it about very specific ones, and it's very good at that. So for example, I asked ChatGPT what are some of the most common CSS attributes out there, and it gave me this list here. So if you want to look at that, these are some of the most common ones. And then the Mozilla documentation has all of them if for some reason you wanted to look at all of them. So we can do MDN CSS properties, and we get this reference. And can look at all the properties that are allowed, right? So we used color today, for example, so you could click on color and look at how that property works. Or we looked at margin, for example, and you can see, hey, here's the different, this is, this is the documentation on how you can use this attribute. Yeah, that's how you can, look up what's available to you. And yeah, that's kind of the basics to get us going. The last thing I want to mention, say hi, Carl. Carl's here. Hey, class. He's hungry. So the last thing I want to mention though is there's a special selector type that's really cool. So on our input, and you're very used to this type. Our input here, for example, you're probably used to things changing for you when you like hover over them or select them, for example. But this is called focusing on it. And then like, for example, when we were on the Pitchfork site, like you just are so used to it, but like whenever I hover over things, they like change, right? So, does anybody know what, like those states, does anybody know what that's called in CSS to be able to change your styling based off those states? It's blank selectors.
Pseudo?
Yeah, pseudo selectors. So we have these different pseudo selectors we can use to basically, like, all you're doing is just changing the CSS based off that state. So you might have an input and you would say, hey, like, I want this input to be blue for whatever reason. You can then just and let's say we like have a class, or let's do an ID. So let's do we'll do ID is email input. So we'll go target that email input. And say, background color. So there's color, which is usually used for font, and then there's background color, which is used for the background color. So we can choose, pink or something for that. Okay, so my input, my background color is pink, right? If I want it to be different when I'm focused into that, which means I've selected it basically. It's like the element that has the focus on the page. If I type, it's for that element because I've clicked it. What can I do to change the color to black for no particular reason whenever I have clicked on that element? Does anybody know? So I want the background color to not be pink when I've clicked into it, but to be black.
Like in CSS, maybe it's like email input focus, click.
Is it email input : active?
It's : and then there's I thought it was focus, but
You say you want the color to change when you click on it, correct?
when it's, well, I guess actually like when you, so there's yes, correct. So when you are clicking it, that I think is active. I think you're right. And then when it's been clicked on and is focused, that's the one I'm wanting, which I think is, thought it was focused, but it's not showing up here. But we can look up our pseudo selectors. Okay, yeah, so it is just : and then focus, not double :. I just got confused because see, like it was showing me that stuff. So yeah, you take your same selector, or you can apply that pseudo selector to a class name, to an ID name. And so we do the same ID up here, but then focus. So notice it's showing me that now. And then we can change the background color to black. And then we'll go back to our page. So right now it's pink, but if I click into it and select it, now it's changed to black. So it, you know, it's not like whenever you get that, you might see like, oh wow, like this site, you know, whenever I hover over that, it like changes and it's dynamic. And it's very simple CSS to get that effect. So that's just whenever someone's hovering over it, you just simply use that pseudo selector hover and then just change the property. So when it's not hovered, it's this gray color, and when it's hovered, it's white. And you would get that functionality. Okay, I'm sorry. I promised that I would never go too far over, and we're 3 minutes over. So that's it for today. I'll send homework in Slack. That's where I'll always post it. It's also, if you need to get ahead, the homework is laid out in the syllabus, which is in our GitHub repo for the curriculum. And you can see the homework for today is this HTML forms part of FreeCodeCamp. So if you ever want to get ahead for whatever reason, you can look at the syllabus here within our curriculum.
The 2 files that you made, will you be posting those or?
Yeah, so I'll push them up right after this, and then whenever you go to curriculum, you will just, so curriculum is linked in the Slack. If you go to our Slack, you can see this GitHub link here. It's the curriculum link. You open that up, and then the syllabus is right there. If you want to see that, and then we are in module 1, so you would go to that, and then we just did day 3, so you can go to that. Now I don't have what I just did, but I'll push that up. It'll show up there.
Thanks.
Yep. Cool. Any questions before we hop off?
Just one kind of nitpicky question. I just very much like terms versus I like to speak accurately when I'm discussing technical jargon. And so with that in mind, HTML has elements of attributes, etc. Right? CSS has properties. I just want to be clear on the language that you're.
Yeah.
I think you said CSS attributes earlier, and it just kind of threw me. So.
Yeah. Like margin is a CSS property.
But in general, like all of HTML is composed of element or the primary of elements, right? So if you think of it like your first level, that's your first item that you would interact with would be an element, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then those elements have attributes.
Attributes.
Right, attributes. And so what is the analog to that in CSS? Is there a top level thing that you interact with in CSS? Is that property? Is that something else?
So the 2 new words we have introduced for CSS is mainly selectors, which is like class name or ID, and then properties, which are like the things we use to change the appearance of something.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good question. Okay, I will post homework and push up to GitHub. And Tulsa peeps, I'll be here in Tulsa on Saturday. And OKC peeps, you'll be where we were on Saturday. But I won't be there, but you'll have your mentors there with you. And we'll be doing an exercise. So you'll be working in pairs. You're not gonna work with your full team, you'll work with like a subset of your team. Like you'll pair with 1 or 2 other people on an exercise. So see you all on Saturday. Sorry we went so far over. I'll try not to do that.
See you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.